Hello everyone, welcome to Community Force webinar. My name is Mehreen Mirza and I'm going to facilitate this webinar and answer questions during the Q&A break. We are waiting for the other attendees to join. So while we wait for everyone else to join, let us show you how you can use this webinar to ask questions and access the handouts. Now, as you can see, there is a panel on the right-hand side of your screen with an arrow. Please use the arrow that is represented in an orange box to collapse or open this panel. Also, you can type in your questions in the question area and click on send or enter. We will receive your questions and answer them during the Q&A break, or I will be typing them in while Christine delivers today's session. If we miss answering any of your questions, we'll get back to you via email after the webinar. Okay. Now, all of you have been put on mute in order to avoid any confusion during this webinar, but you have the question panel already. Now, let's just see who has joined. Okay, we are still getting names. Okay, all right. But we have to get started. So let's get started. The topic for today's webinar is application rollover for the one-to-many application process, where you have one application that is assigned, that is associated with multiple funds at the back end. We have with us Christine Smith, who will be our trainer for today and go over all the relevant areas under this topic. The duration of this webinar is 1 hour. I'll pass over the mic to Christine. All yours, Christine. Thank you, everyone, for joining.
And thank you so much, Maureen, for that introduction. So let's go ahead and get started with today's presentation. So today's presentation is going to be a brief overview of how to roll over your application process to begin a new application cycle. And of course, this is for that if you're using a one-to-many application process where you have one application form with multiple funding sources attached. So today we're going to discuss how to update those funding sources, how to clone your current application, and then how to make adjustments to sections and questions if you need to make adjustments to those pertaining to your new process for the new cycle. So the individuals that are going to benefit from today's webinar are going to be any of the administrators that are responsible for creating that new application form from each year to year. If you have multiple cycles within a year, then of course that's going to be the same process. And so this is all of those that are responsible for creating that new application process that you need to have your applicants apply to. Now, the topics we're going to be talking about today, we're going to be going over the application funds, and how to clone your application. There's adding the application contact. That's changed a little bit over the last couple years, how you do that. So we just want to make sure that that's clear to some of our clients. And then also how to assign funding to an application form, since this is a one-to-many process. How to activate other areas that are going to be crucial to your application process, just like your text tabs, any additional data you need to look at to make sure that that's updated before you go live. And then we'll take a quick break for about 5 to 10 minutes. And at that time, that's when Maureen will answer some of those questions that are pertaining to the topics that we've covered so far. And then we'll go into, now that you've cloned your application, what are some changes you need to make, maybe to your sections? What are some things you need to look at? How to add and remove questions. If you're adding new funds or you're removing funds because you don't have any funding for that specific fund for this period, some good helpful tips on how to handle that. And then we'll just do a final overview of some other areas that you want to make sure you look at before you go live. That's also going to clone with the process. And then we'll also talk about how to test your application if you have a live platform. So if you have an application process, you have multiple applications out there, some of them are live, you want to be able to test, but you don't want applicants to see because you're still testing it. How can you do that? So that's what we'll cover in that. And then we'll take another final break, answer any remaining questions, and then we'll close the session for today. So like we said, today's session is going to be on a one-to-many application process. So that's when you have one application form, and then that one application form is tied to multiple funding sources. So if you have scholarships, grants, if you have one application, but there's multiple funds that are going to be awarding those applicants. That's what a one-to-many process is. You have one application they're applying for, the system's matching based on criteria that you've built on the application form, matching applicants to the funds that they're eligible for, and then that's what the one-to-many application process is. That's when you have that matching functionality built in. So the first step then, of course, with the application rollover. So what is an application rollover? It's the process where you take an existing application form that you already have out there that maybe you used last cycle, and it's the exact same process. Maybe you just need to make some tweaks to it for this next process. Then what you're gonna do is you're gonna roll that application over. You're gonna clone it. And so when you clone an application, then what clones over? So with that rollover, you're going to get an exact replica of the application process you had that you're cloning. So that's going to bring over all that data, the general information, all the sections and questions, pre-qualifications, your text tabs. If you have funds tied to that, which this is a one-to-many process, so more than likely you have all those funds. You've got criteria built on those funds. You've got evaluation processes set up for those funds. You've got tasks for those funds. You've got committees. All of that, when you do the rollover process, is going to flow into the next application when you clone it. You don't have to rebuild it if you've already had it in that other application form. It's all going to stay intact. So what's the first step? So the first step in doing a rollover process is you're going to be thinking about your funding sources. So you have an application form and your applicants are applying, and you're going to think about what are the differences, because you're going to clone everything over. So what are some things that you need to make adjustments for? So of course, the first thing you're going to need is you're going to need a new posting fund. That posting fund is the fund that puts it out there on the site where the applicants can apply. The posting fund isn't matching, doesn't have monetary amounts tied to it. You have individual funds that are linked to the application form that does your awarding, but you have that posting fund, which I'll show you here in a minute what we mean by that to give you better clarity. And then the other thing you're going to want to think of is what's the fiscal year academic period that you're going to be awarding in, because that's what you put in the posting fund. So when you put it in the posting fund, it's going to roll to all the existing funds that are attached to it. It's going to update all that data for you. So that's the next thing you want to think about before you start building your new posting fund. What's the academic year? And then if you have any new funds, so maybe you had a new donor come in and now this is a new cycle, you've got enough money to fund scholarships for that specific fund. And so how do you add that fund? So we'll talk about building a new fund and then how to get it added to the new application. And then if you want to see a history of your existing funds that you've awarded over the years, how do you see a history? Where does that come from? Well, you can get that from the fund history report, which is in the global reports, as well as you can see it in the individual fund that for that specific fund in the Fund History 360, which I'll show you as well. So let's go ahead and go with the first step then. Let's talk about how to do the first step of your rollover process. So you always want to start with building out your posting fund. So that's the fund that's tied directly to the application that the applicants see on the site. When they go to the site, they see that posting fund. It doesn't have any monetary, it's just an information fund for you to gather give information to your applicants. And so if you had one from last year, some of those of you, if you didn't get to come to our new release update, we do have the ability to take the posting fund that you had from a prior period, any type of fund for that fact, but you can now clone funding sources. So let's go to Manage Application Funds, because that's where you build out that funding source. And so here's a listing of all the funds I have on my site. So I have last year's posting fund. So this is my 2023 posting fund. There's my application that was tied to it. So I'm starting a new cycle, a new period. So I'm going to create a whole new posting fund. I don't really need to make a whole lot of changes, but what I can do is I can actually clone this now. So to clone a posting fund or any fund, you just come over here for the fund that you want to make a copy of, and you hit the clone button right here. So this is last year's. I'm going to clone it because it's very similar, same process, but I do want to go ahead and make some adjustments here to the name because it's not the 2023 now, it's now the 2024. So I'm going to make an adjustment to the name. And then I'm going to hit clone and edit. Now, if I just hit clone, it's just going to make an exact copy, and I then would have to go back in to make the edits. So I will go ahead. I do have some edits I might want to make, maybe some dates or maybe some different description I might want to make a change on. So I'm going to do the clone and edit here. And then you'll see it's an exact copy. So of course, this is where then I'm like, okay, I just created a copy of that fund. So what do I need to make adjustments for? So the name, of course, I made the adjustment to the name already. I don't need to associate an application. One, I can't associate an application right now because I haven't built the application. And you don't want to do it yet because you want it to associate it when you're actually cloning the application. And when I do that clone process, you'll see where I associate the fund at that stage. So I don't want to do it now. I don't want to associate it. I want to do it when I build the new application. Then here, the annual budget academic year. I won't need to do anything with this because when I tie it to the application form, it'll pick up the new period. So I can just leave that alone. I don't need to do anything. Anything that has a red asterisk is going to be any fund that's required, any field that's required for that fund. Additional things you're seeing here on the screen, you may not have on yours, but I have it on mine because I have, of course, activated additional fields in my fund setup. Those fields are available to be activated in the administration site settings under the fund setup. So I've activated those on my site, of course, for illustrative purposes. So of course, published right now, I probably don't want to publish this posting fund because I don't want applicants. I have a live site. Applicants can come to my site right now. They're coming into it. If I had it published, they'd be able to go in and see this. I don't want them to see it yet. So I'm going to probably put this right now as no. But of course, when I'm ready to go live, I need to make sure and come back and put that to yes. Okay, and then of course the allow non-CF applicants and CF applicants, if you have integration, you know what that's all about. And then show fund on fund details. If this says yes, when I make this live, then it will show the details on the screen, meaning the details that I've put here on this screen. Any items that I've added, they'll be able to see those. When we're building out the secondary fund, the new fund, if they're matched to that and I want them to be able to see what the details of the fund they're matched to, then I want to make sure these fund details say yes. So for me, I always leave this as yes because I want them to be able to see the details of the funds. And of course, if you got your email, so this is where you're going to make your changes. You're just going to look through what applies to this year's posting fund. So this is that email signature. That's the signature that's going to be tied to that posting fund. If I'm using email signature in my notification center for the application form that's going to be tied to this, this is what it's going to populate in that specific thing, that application. And then the description, is there any changes? Did I put dates in the description that I need to make adjustments for? Do I have more ranges? No, what is the details that I want to make the adjustment for? But if there aren't any, then I can just keep scrolling through, go through everything I want to make a change on. Of course, this is my posting fund, so I don't have any donors to tie to this. And then of course, search filters, if you're using those, all of that you can see is going to clone over. You won't need to make those adjustments unless you have additional search filters you want to add. So then once I'm done, I'm just going to hit save and exit. And then it's going to tell me that it's been updated. And now I have that new fund built out in the system. So that's the posting fund. So since I'm here on the Manage Application Funds, this is also the best time to go ahead and create any new funds that I have available now, that I have new donors or new funds that have come in that I want to add to my new application process. So this is the best stage to do that, so you're not doing your back and forth. So I'm just going to come up here real quick and just make a real quick new fund so you can see how to do that. So I'm just going to come here and on the Manage Application Funds, I'm going to come over here and hit Set Up Funding Opportunity. And I'm just going to make a real quick one here so we don't take up too much of our time. So this is, I'm just going to put the name of my new fund. Whoops, go up here to the name and click in it. Okay, I don't have an application to associate yet because there's no, this is the actual fund that's going to be awarding. So in a one-to-many process, you do not associate the application. When you're doing a one-to-many process, you will not, on the actual awarding funds, you do not associate an application. I do want to go ahead and put a sponsoring organization in here. And then here, the annual budget academic year, I can go ahead and leave this blank, but if I do have a monetary amount available, I can put that in there. But one thing that's important, because when you go to add this fund, it does need to be the same academic year as your application form. So just make a note of what that's going to be. So this is going to be my 24-25 academic year. And then when I go to associate this fund to the application, it'll show up in that listing. And when we get there, you'll know what I mean by that as well. So I've got 10,000 for 24-25. If you didn't have anything, you can leave this as 0. And then when we get to the assigning the fund to the application form, you can put a monetary amount in that as well. And then anything else published, I don't need this to be viewable to the applicants on the search fund page. That's that first page they come to, but I do want them, if they've been matched to it, I do want them to be able to see the details of it. So I'm going to leave that as yes. And then of course, email signature, it's not, this is only if there's an application directly tied to it that I would need an email signature here, because that's what the system's looking at, is the application notification center. Any description I want to put in, I can fill all that up. I'm just going to leave that blank for now. And then I'm just going to go ahead and hit save and next. And then this is where I'm going to see, okay, is there an internal contact that I want to put? If there is, then I can add that contact. If not, I can just hit next. If I want to put the donor information, maybe I want to add the donor to this. So let's go ahead and add the donor here. And their email, because I'm using that thank you letter functionality. So I do want the system to know what the email is of that specific donor. And then their data. And then I can just hit next. And if there's any search filters, I would want to go through and set the search filters. This is a new fund, so I would need to go, if I'm using search filters, and set all of those search filters. And then once I did so, I could go ahead and hit finish. If I didn't have search filters, I could just ignore this and hit finish and not set any. And now that funding source has been created. So now I have my new fund, and I now have my new posting fund. So I have both of those funds built, ready to go. If you had any more funds, this is of course where you would build them, but I'm just going to do the two. So now we're done with building funds. So what's the next step? So the next step is going to be, we're going to clone the application. So when we clone an application, we're going to look at the last cycle. We're going to clone that application because it's the same application process. So we're going to clone that application for the process that we're wanting to create this for. And so when we do that, these are all the items: general information, sections, pre-qualifications, request instructions. Every area that's in that existing application form, the assignment of application funds that were on the previous application is going to come over. All of the eligibility you had built on that previous application is going to come over. Any automated scoring, any reviewer tasks, your committees, email templates, any ad hoc reports you had on that prior application, it's going to come over and stay intact in this process. So let's go ahead and go to the site and go to the next step, of course. So how do we clone? So let's go home. And when you clone, always don't try to get in a hurry, because if you miss that fund setup functionality, then you will have to manually enter all those funds, or you would just have to delete this application and recreate a new one. But if you miss that specific step, then that will not send those funds over. So you want to make sure we follow all the steps with the cloning process. So to clone an application, I'm just going to come up here. where it says clone existing application, and select it. And then it's going to ask me which application template am I wanting to clone. So I'm going to select my drop down. I'm going to look over here, and I want to clone last year's 2023 one-to-many demo app. I'm going to clone that. And when I do that, it gives me a replica of that name with the word copy. So I'm just going to make an adjustment to the name. This is now my 2024. Anything down here, now I'm looking, any other changes for this new application, this is where I'm going to make them. So here's a description. Let me go ahead and take that and make that date change. The academic year is automatic, so it's going to look at my begin date and deadline date and come up with its own academic year. If you need to override that, you can. So maybe you're taking applications. Maybe the start and end date is this year, but it's the next cycle is when you're doing the awarding. Then, of course, I'm doing this for the 24-25. It's going to pick up those dates, but maybe my awarding, I want it to be in a different cycle. So that's what you're thinking about. What's the awarding cycle for this application form? Because when you create the start and end date, you might be taking applicants in one year, but the awarding is in the year pushed out. So that's where you're going to make the adjustment here. So I'm just going to let it stay on auto because it's going to look at the administration site settings for academic year, look at the dates that I've entered, and then determine what fiscal period it's going to fall within. So I'm just going to put my start date here so that it picks up the right date, my end date, and then any adjustments, maybe my reply to, maybe that admin at Community Force is no longer valid, and I make the adjustment. So that's what you're looking at. What's the data for the new application process going forward? What are the changes you need to make for this specific one? Now, I talked about the contact. So in the past, you used to have to create this screen, go out, go to the general information, find the contact, and add the contact. But we do have it right here now in this screen. When you're cloning the fund, it's going to look at the contact from the prior fund, and it's going to pick up that individual. So the contact email address is the contact of the admin in your organization that's responsible for getting all the emails pertaining to the application process. The automatic emails that go out from the system are going to go to that application contact. So if you have the activation on the site settings to show every time an applicant submitted, you want an email to go to that admin, this is where it's looking to know who to send that to. If you're using this merge field, contact email, contact first name, contact second, last name, it's going to look here at this email address to see who you added. So this is where you can make the change if you need to by clicking the add, and then you can search for the end of admin, put them in, and then make that adjustment. If it's not changed, then of course you can just leave it as is. And then just look at your settings. Has anything changed, or is it all the same? Is it all the same settings? Then you're good. You can just go ahead and leave it as it is. You don't need to make any adjustments. If you do, this is the time to do that. And then here, look at your instructions here. Anytime you have any typed instructions, always look at those in the rollover process, because sometimes you might put a date in here, or maybe you've added data that's no longer valid. This is where you're giving them the instructions. So this is where you're going to want to make those adjustments for the new process. And these are crucial areas that you do want to look at. So now the next step is going to be very important. We don't want to skip the next step because it won't build that fund. It won't bring over all that criteria, and then you're going to have a mess and then try to figure out how to get that criteria over and start all over. So I'm going to come here. I'm going to hit save and exit. And this screen right here is the important screen you want to get. This is where you're telling the system this is what needs to come over. So you'll notice all of these funds here were the funds from last year's cycle. Now I'm going to make a statement here of a helpful hint. If you have a fund that you don't have funding for, and it's not going to be a part of this application process, do not remove it from here. Because if you remove it from here, you've lost all the criteria that was built for that specific funding source as well. Don't remove it if it's a fund that later you're just removing it because you don't have funding. Maybe down the road 2 years from now, you may have funding. You want to keep that going from year to year and you're cloning in the background so that you have it, so that when it comes time to reactivate it, all you got to do is just do a few little tweaks to it. I'll show you how to make it so it doesn't show to the applicants, and then you just need to do the reverse to make it show to the applicants 2 years from now when you have that funding. So if it's a fund, though, that is totally done, they're never going to bring it back, then yes, you can unselect it and not have it come over because you're no longer going to need it. But if you are ever going to need that fund in the future, do not unselect this, because if you unselect it, then it causes a lot of extra work for you in the long run. Okay, so here, this was the fund that was tied to the original application I cloned from. So I'm going to unselect this because that's that posting fund. It's going to have that here in those funding opportunities because it was part of that other cycle, that other application, but I don't want it part of this one. Okay, so then how do I get the associated posting fund to this? Well, right up here it says select associated fund. So you'll notice here it does give you instructions on what the two differences are. The assigned funds are the awarded funds. The associated fund is the fund that is the posting fund, the one that's going to make it viewable to your applicants. That's the one that's directly tied to that application form. So here is where I'm going to select that posting fund I made. So I made the 2024 one-to-many posting fund. So I'm going to select it. That's what it's my posting fund. And so all of these funds that I have selected, the system's going to automatically put that academic year that's out there. It's going to automatically put that on there. Now, you may be asking, well, what about the new fund? Well, of course, the new fund isn't going to be here because it wasn't part of last cycle. So we'll get to that here in a minute. But right now, all we're doing is what was on the old application, we want to bring it over to this new application. So this is where we're doing that. The system's saying these are the funds that are going to be assigned. They're going to be assigned for my 24-25 academic year because that's the automatic year that's picking up. And my posting fund is going to be the one-to-many posting fund. So I'm going to hit Save Fund Details. And now it's linked all of those associated funds. So I'm going to click OK. And now I'm done building that application form. So at this stage, I have an exact replica of the last application. If you didn't need to make any changes, then you're ready to test. But of course, right now, we do have changes we need to make because we have a new fund. Maybe we have a fund we're going to drop off. So now we're going to talk about how to assign the new funds to your application. Where do you see that fund assignment? So the fund assignment is where you're going to add all the award amounts. So of course you have a new cycle. So each cycle or each academic year needs new award amounts. We didn't go when we were in that fund screen, we didn't add all that there. How do I add that? How does the system know what I'm going to be awarding the applicants for this new period? So we're going to go to the assign applications fund. So now that we have our cloned application, we're going to come here. There's that new application I just made. Right, where to go? Right here. This one-to-many. There's my start date, my end date. And so I'm going to go ahead and select it. And then once I select it, of course, there's no applicants, but I want to go to application settings. So application settings is where everything in regards to the build of that application is. So I'm going to select that. And then you're going to see, since I cloned it, everything's there from the original application. And then to get to the assigned fund, so I usually do the assigned funds before I do anything, because if you need to add a fund or remove a fund, you're going to do that in the questions. But if you haven't assigned your new fund, it's not going to show up in your questions to be able to add it for your criteria building. So I always do that next, is assign the new fund. So here's where I go, assign application funds. Excuse me. And here's all the existing funds that have been assigned. Right now, I don't have any money allocated. I'll explain to you why this 10,000 is there in a minute. So now I need to find the new funds that I want to attach. So this is, I'm going to come here. There's that new fund. I'm going to hit the arrow over here, and I'm going to go ahead and hit save. It's going to ask me, am I sure I want to assign it? I'm going to say yes, and now it's assigned it. Now notice, remember when I built that fund today, I did add a $10,000 amount for the 24-25 period. Now, if you ever come here and you look at this listing here and you're not seeing any fund names here, then know that that's because that specific fund doesn't have the correct academic year. So once you add the fund, if you did put an amount in it for that same academic year, it's going to show here. Now, remember this total amount allocated. This is the amount allocated for the fiscal period. So maybe you have 2 cycles. So maybe you're going to award half of it in one cycle, half of it in another. This is looking at the entire academic year. So I still keep this intact as 10,000. I want to change it to 5. You might say, well, this application process, I'm only allocating 5. But you're actually allocating 10 for the entire fiscal period. So that's where I'm going to put the amount here. Now, we do have a functionality I'm going to discuss here that is something that has to be turned on if you want it. And so I've added the new fund. So I know now, okay, I have this new fund. But what about the existing old funds that I'm not going to be using this period? We do have a functionality that allows, if this says 0, the system will not match it to the applicants in the fund eligibility question. The applicants won't see that they're matched to a fund if it says 0. So I have that functionality turned on mine. And so then I don't have to worry about removing criteria, adding criteria, making sure that that criteria has been changed. I just make this monetary amount 0, and then the system knows, okay, there's no funding. It's not going to show that to the applicant. Now on the back end as the admin, I can see, okay, my AHL scholarship had 5 applicants matched to it. I didn't have any funding. But maybe during that application process, maybe you have it open all year like I do mine. A donor comes in, says, hey, I want to be able to get in on this fiscal period. I want to give you some money to be able to fund that so that we can award some scholarships. So then all you need to do then is come in, put a monetary amount in, find the applicants that were matched to that, and then you can reopen those sections to your applicants and say, hey, this is this app scholarship's now available. Or maybe it won't come available, you just leave it as 0 and then they'll never be matched to it. But you'll be able to see, oh, they missed out. You can tell your donor, hey, we had these many applicants. If we would have had funding, we would have been able to award them, but we didn't have the funding to do that, to help get them to fund their funds as well. So I have that process. If you don't have that process, go ahead and still leave it as 0 because you're not going to have anything, but I'm going to show you how to hide those from your applicants without losing all your criteria, the little tips. So if you want that functionality though, where if it's 0, it won't match them, then you can enter a support ticket and have someone in the support team, a client success specialist, get with you and determine if that's a functionality you would like to have activated and how to activate that on your site. So, but if you don't, remember here, I want to make sure I put monetary amounts. So how do I add those? So this is a nice screen because you can do it all at once. But if you don't know the monetary amount, then you do at least want to put $1 in here if you have that functionality like I do. So put update amount allocated and at least put $1 in. The applicant doesn't see this. It's only on the back end you see that. But what you do need to do is come here and select the funds that you want to add monetary amounts to. And then you just start plugging in. So maybe I want to do all of them right now. I would just select all. And then I just start plugging in the amounts that I'm going to be awarding. And then this is where you would do that. And of course, if you don't know right now, then you would just put $1 in. And then once you're done, you would just come down here. I don't know how it's going to act when I have zeros and everything. And then hit save. And then that's going to be the amounts that it's allocating at this time. And now you've got that monetary figure for that fiscal period. It's going to put it on that fiscal period. So that's where you would assign those application, assign the new application funds and add the amounts allocated for the funds that you have out there that are attached to that. Now, let's go ahead and talk about the next thing here. I think that's where we can go ahead and break, and then we'll go ahead and turn the mic over to Maureen and see if she has any questions. So Maureen, the mic is yours.
Thank you so much, Christine. Okay, we do have a couple of interesting questions. One thing that some of our attendees have noticed is there is a
Hello,
contact. Yes, Christine, can
Maureen,
you hear me? Yes, Christine.
are you with us? I'm not hearing you for some reason.
Hello, can you hear me? Hello,
Hello, Maureen. I can hear you now.
can you hear me? Oh,
Yes, yes, we
something
can hear you
happened
now.
with my headset. Yes, it was working just fine. My apologies, everyone, for that.
That's
I
okay.
went on, but yeah. Okay. We have a couple of questions we'll get back to now. My
Okay.
apologies for the delay because of my audio. Okay. So one of the questions that our attendees have is there are two contacts, right? One contact is being shown under application and the other one is under the fund. What is the difference? So the difference here is the one that is associated with the application, as Christine has mentioned, is the application contact. This is where if you activate the settings on the site settings screen, you as an admin or that specific application contact will receive emails on post acceptance submissions, application submissions, those sort of emails. You will receive those emails. When the contact you're seeing on the fund is just a contact as a placeholder for your applicants to reach out to you if they have any questions. So that's the difference between the contact on the fund setup screen and the contact on the application settings screen. Now, another question someone has is, I cannot see the contact, I cannot add the contact, or I don't have a place to add the fund contact or a donor. As Christine was creating the fund, Christine, can we go back to the fund setup screen, please? So what our attendee is asking is, can we go to one of the application where there is, yeah, anyone, because those fields are enabled already. Yeah. If we click on edit, so right at the bottom of the screen, if you see, there is a place to add the contact, right? There is a place to add the contact and there is a place to add a donor. Now, if you are not seeing these two options, these have to be enabled from the site settings screen, from the administration tab. Can we go to the administration tab, Christine? I'll just quickly show this. And donors do not need to be associated with your posting fund. Remember that. donors are only associated with the funds that are assigned from the back end. Okay, let's go to the site settings, Christine. I'll just show that, those two settings. Yeah, okay. So now you see on the screen, see grants fellowship settings. If you open that, you're going to see the fund donor, enable that, and the fund contact. Those two fields on the right hand side. Those two fields, if you enable, you're going to see both the fields on the fund setup screen. Okay. Thank you so much, Christine. Thank you. All right. All right. When I am trying to clone the application, it does not appear in the list. Well, there is a reason, because if we go to the home screen and the application, Christine, just one last question. Yeah. So let's just say that you have created your fund, you have created your new funds as well, and then you come to the home screen to now you're ready to clone your application. But on the application, when you're trying to pick your template, the template that you're trying to pick from last year or any particular year that you're picking isn't showing up. No, can we go to one particular application, Christine? Let's go to the general settings. Anyone? Yes. General information. So here, if we scroll down, there should be a button that says published. See the published? If this is not enabled, this application will not show up in the list as a template during the cloning process. So you just want to make sure that this is enabled. I think I'm done, Christine. The rest of the questions I have answered on the Q&A panel. Anyone else have any questions? Please feel free to post them on the questions panel and I'll answer those questions. Back to you, Christine. My apologies once again, everyone. Thank you. Christine, if you're saying something, I can't hear you.
Okay,
Looks like,
sorry. We're having
ah,
sound checks today. Okay, so now that you've built your application form, some key areas I'm going to focus on now are just some areas that if you're using them, you're going to want to make sure and activate them. So one of them is pre-qualification questions. Of course, you're going to want to look at that and make sure that there's not any dates associated with that. Any changes you want to make, you're going to go ahead and make those changes and click save. And then also the text tabs. This is an area that a lot of our clients forget to look at. So in the text tabs, one thing you want to make sure you note is anytime you clone an application, it will not publish the text tabs. So you do need to go into all of your text tabs, look at the data in those text tabs, make any adjustments. So like this one here, I do have some date adjustments I need to make changes to. And so I make those changes and then I want to go ahead and make sure I click save. But something else you want to do is notice here it says published no. So if you're using this text tab for the new cycle, you do want to make sure and activate it, because if you don't mark this as yes, it will not activate that text tab. So every time you clone an application, it turns the text tabs off. So if you do want to turn them on and you want to make them a part of this application process, then you do want to come here and hit publish yes. And the reason this defaults to no when you clone is because a lot of times you want to make sure you update dates. And so you want to make sure that we force you to look at those text tabs so that you don't miss that data, so that if something changes, you make sure you catch that change. So you would have, if you have 5 text tabs, excuse me, 5 text tabs built, then you would need to make sure go in on all 5 of those and mark this as yes. And then of course, once you mark it yes, make sure to click the save button to save that information. So now let's talk about your sections and questions. So now we've got our new application form. Maybe I need to make updates to my sections. Maybe I need to make updates to my questions. I have that new fund sitting out there. So that new fund, I'm going to need to know how to update the questions so that I can build the criteria for that fund so that the applicants get matched to that. So where do I do that? So let's roll up here and go to sections and questions. And so this is where I'm going to make any new adjustments. Now, when you make adjustments to your new application form, your new application form, if you need to add questions or add sections, if you're using global reports only allow you to pull fields into that report that are in the master template. So anytime you add a section or you add a question, if you're doing global reports and you have a master template, build it in your master template first and then push it down to this application form. Now, we're not going to get into all the details as to how to do that because of time constraints. We don't have enough time to go into all that, but we will eventually this year probably do a training on the master template and how to push down to applications any data you put into that. So that's what you want to do. You want to build new items in the master template because anything built in the master template, if the field is in the master template, it's going to be available for your global reporting if you're using global reporting. If you're a grant user and you have agency profiles and you want to make maybe that new question you're adding, you want that to be part of an agency profile that's built off of the master template. So we always recommend if you have a master template and you're using global reports, build it in that master template first and then push it down to your application form. Then you have it. If you delete a question, don't delete it from your master template because anything you delete from the master template, if you had built a report, it's no longer going to be available in that report. So the master template is going to have a history of everything you've ever built on your site. But of course, in the application, of course, if I need to delete something from this application, I can still do it in this application itself. It's not going to take it from the master template, but it is going to remove it so it's not a part of this specific application process. Okay, so some things I want to touch on first of all when adding questions is one, the master template when you add questions, but now when you're removing questions. So when you remove a question, it's good practice to delete questions before you go live with your application process. And the reason that is that if applicants have answered those questions, it will cause data issues on the site because it's trying to find something. Now that question's gone, they answered it. So anytime you want to make changes and adjustments to your application form, you want to do that before you go live because once you go live, it's harder to retrieve that data and harder to get that information, and it can cause issues with your site if you're deleting after applicants have already answered questions. So what if you have a question that maybe is a question that you forgot to delete? You can go ahead and exclude it, and then of course then applicants won't get that. So deleting takes a question out completely. Excluding just makes it a temporary exclusion. So maybe you have a question that's part of a fund, maybe you're not going to use that fund this year, then you can exclude that question, and then next year when you bring the fund back, you can include it. So those are the things that you're thinking about. Sections, maybe you have a section, you don't want to lose it completely, so you don't want to delete it, but maybe you just want to make it inactive or active. So sections, if you want to deactivate a section but keep it intact for the next year when you clone this, then all you need to do is just come here where it says activate section and unselect it and then hit save, and then it won't make that specific section a part of this application process. Another thing you're going to want to look at when you clone an application, especially your sections, is look at the deadline date. Because when it clones an application form, you're going to notice it picks up the deadline of the application. So of course you have post-accepted sections, you have acceptance sections, maybe you have some thank you letter sections. You have these sections that are opening with different deadlines, not opening, but having a different deadline than the application form. You're going to want to go ahead and make sure that you adjust those deadlines as well at this stage. So of course, like this one here, This is my scholarship acknowledgement. Of course, they're not going to be acknowledging it till next year, so I want to make sure I adjust that deadline date. So I'm going to hit the edit over here, and then I need to come here and then make the adjustment for when that specific section is going to be due and completed by the applicant, and then just hit save and exit. And also look at your section instructions. So when I was just in there, if I go back into the edit here, your section instructions, look at all of those. Maybe do a preview of all your sections, especially if you're new to Community Force, you're a new admin, the old admin's not here, you don't know what they put. Just go in and look at all of your section specific instructions just to make sure there's no date data that needs to be rolled and updated for the new process. So, and then just make sure to hit save and exit if you do make changes there. So look at your deadline dates, make sure that those have been rolled, and make sure that your instructions don't have any data that needs to be updated for the new application process. And then of course, if you're not going to use a section, just go ahead and deactivate it so that it's there later on. If you clone this application next year and you need that section now, then all you got to do is just come here and do the opposite, select it, hit save, and now it's part of that new process once again. Now, when deleting and adding questions, another thing you're going to want to make sure of is these little items here. When you see something in green, that means there's conditional logic. So of course, when you have conditional logic like this one's going to be looking, this is a fund, it's looking at the fund eligibility question, and it's saying if they match to this fund, then show this section. So if you have look at your criteria, if you're new especially, and get familiar with the criteria, because if you delete the question that triggers this specific functionality, this condition is no longer going to be valid, and it's going to start showing this section because the question that made it eligible for is no longer there. So when you're deleting questions or you're deleting sections, make sure you understand your criteria. So anything that's in green, go ahead and look at it. Is it looking at that specific question you're about to delete? Because if it is, then it's going to start showing, because now it doesn't have the criteria available to make that happen. So that's something else when you're deleting, you're going to want to use caution. So now in my scenario, I added a new fund to my process. So I have the show for fund functionality, which means it builds that automatic criteria. So how do I get the system to start building the criteria for my new fund? So with the functionality, what it does is when you go into the question that's needed for the criteria, you're going to set the setting so that the system knows, okay, this question is used to build the criteria for your fund. So how we do that here, so I have my new fund. So I'm going to need, maybe I need to add a question. So I'm going to go into the sections and I'm going to add the questions I need. But in my scenario, the question's already out there, so I don't need to add it. But what I do need to do is I need to add to that question that this question is going to be used to build the criteria to make this applicant eligible. So in my fund, I am going to be funding anyone who is a Latin female is going to be eligible for this specific fund. And so what I need to do is I need to go into those questions that tell me their ethnicity and their gender. So I'm going to go into those questions. And of course, like I said, if you don't have one built, then you build the question. And then when you're building the question, you can adjust the fund at that stage. But I already have these two questions in my application form. It's just I'm adding this new fund, and I just need to let the system know that these two questions are going to be used to build the criteria for that new fund. So I'm going to go into this gender question. And then once I get there, I can go down here where it says criteria fund. So if this was a new question, of course, you're going to want to make sure and mark this yes. But since this is an existing question that's being used for criteria and other funds, it's automatically marked as yes. And then as soon as this says yes, this is the field that pops up. And then of course, all these funds that are listed here are all the funds that are based off of this question. The criteria to match an applicant to this funding source is using these questions. So my new fund is this one here. So I'm going to select it and then make sure not to unselect anything when you're doing this. Make sure everything's there. And then I'm just going to click OK. And now I'm done. I'm going to hit save and exit. And then my other one was ethnicity. So I'm just going to go into the ethnicity. And do the same to that. It says yes, and then I need to add this fund here. Click OK and hit save and exit. Okay, so now I've done that. I do that for all the questions I need to use to build the criteria for my fund. And I'm doing this now as I'm building questions and adding questions because I want this to be there when I go to get to the stage where I have to build the criteria. So that's how to add information for a fund. Now, to remove data for a fund, so the criteria is built in my process. So we do have a couple of clients. I'm going to talk about two different processes, and hopefully I don't confuse you too much when we talk about this. We have two ways that clients match on our system. The suggested way is to use our automated fund criteria build, where you do the show for fund, you add it to the fund, and then in the fund criteria, if you need to remove a fund, all you need to do is add a line to that criteria, which I'll show you what that is, to a fund that you're not going to be using anymore. Add a criteria of a status of withdrawn, and then it won't match your applicants to that specific one. Then the next year, that criteria stayed intact because you didn't delete the fund, and that criteria stayed intact. And then all you have to do if you bring it back is just go to that criteria, remove that withdrawn status criteria, and then it'll once again start matching your applicants. Or if you're using that process where you have the zero amount, that functionality that I told you about, then all you have to do is leave it at zero and it won't match your applicants. So that's what I like to use that functionality, where if you leave it at zero, it won't match my applicants. That way I don't have to do anything here. I can just leave it all out there and it won't match the applicants to that fund based on the eligibility criteria, and then it won't show any questions that are based on the fund that they've been matched to. Now, when I say it won't show the questions that it's based on the fund that they've been matched to, that means any sections or questions. So in our process, usually what we do is when an applicant applies, let me go back out here, and this is the most recommended process for matching funds. If I can get back out here, is the one I'm showing you right now, and then I'm going to show you another way that it's possible, but it can cause a lot of slowdown on your system. It can make it harder to remove things from the site. For some reason, I'm going to have to go back into the site this way here. Scholarships, log in, go back in. Okay, so what we do is we have all those questions, and like I just did, all those questions, we have the system automatically build criteria. We go into the question, say this question's for this fund, this question's for this fund, and then the criteria, which you'll see when I go back into that, you'll see how that builds. So then, based on what funds they've been matched to, which is this area right here, we have this section called fund eligibility. The fund eligibility, what it does is when the applicants apply based on questions that they've answered, it's looking at that criteria that's been built and then saying, okay, you're eligible for these funds. It's giving a listing of all those funds to the applicant, and then the applicant clicks save to this section. They see the funds they've been matched to. Right here, it'll show them. They hit update and then hit save on that section, and that'll automatically, what it does is any fund that they've been matched to, then you can actually build logic like this one here. This is my DHG scholarship form. And so what I'm saying is when I build this section, if an applicant gets matched here, I want them to have an essay up here. or maybe I want this form to appear to them now as part of their application process. So as soon as they click this, they match to their funds. The system says, okay, you're matched to these funds. Now that you're matched to these funds, you now have this additional data to complete before you can submit your application form. So for instance, here in my essays, I have this MCF. If they were to be matched to that, what I have a condition, it's saying, look at that eligibility fund question. It's a special question type. And once I hit save, it's when it's going to match them. If it says it doesn't say that scholarship, then don't show them this section. But if it does match them to that scholarship, then that section is going to appear on their dashboard. That question is going to appear, and they're going to then have that essay question to answer as an additional part of their application form. So that's how we did these 3 questions. Same with sections, we did the same thing. We set conditions on that fund eligibility question that said if they match to this specific fund, the DHG scholarship fund, if they've matched to that, then show them this section. So of course, once they've been matched, it's going to show them that specific fund. So if you're not turning the fund off and you don't have that $0 functionality, then it will match the applicant and show them these sections. So how do you get these sections from appearing? Well, that's when you have to go into the criteria and add that special line of text so that it doesn't match them to the fund and they won't get that, which I'll show you here in a minute. Now, the other way, which is one I don't recommend, is what some of our clients do is they don't have this fund eligibility question. They have a whole section with a bunch of criteria happening in the background, which is why we don't recommend this. They build a question, and then do you meet the eligibility and want to apply? They're putting it on the applicant. Sometimes you don't have any criteria built on this question, but then this is the question that makes them eligible. So if they say yes to this, then the system says, okay, they're eligible. This you can see if I click on it. This is the question. See this long list of logic? So what it's saying is if the applicant answers this question, then show them this fund and let them determine if they want to apply to it, yes or no. So this causes a lot of slowdown in the system. You can do this, but it does cause a lot of resource slowdown because it's looking at all the questions and it's building a determination of whether or not to show this question to the applicant or hide the question based on if they've answered those other questions correctly. This is like building criteria. You can build criteria just like this. So we recommend you do the criteria, use that fund eligibility question, and then the system will match them and then they apply, they're automatically applied to any fund that they've matched to. They don't have to say yes or no to it. But if you want them to actually see what they've been matched to, then have the option to opt out, then this is what some of our clients do. And this is not a way that I recommend. But you'll notice this condition here has all that logic on it because that's just telling them what the fund's about. And then this one has the exact same logic, as you can see, because that's the one that they have to say yes or no to, because the yes or no reply, so this is the AJG, the yes or no reply is what makes them eligible for that fund. So this is another way that our clients do that. So if the AJG scholarship fund is a fund that I'm not going to be using this year, then I have a lot of work to clean this up. Now remember, the other way, all I have to do is go into the eligibility and add a line of criteria. But with this one, there's a little bit more work. I can't just come here and exclude these questions. So I'm probably thinking, all I have to do is exclude those. And then when I exclude them, they won't match the applicant to them. But since this is a criteria question that's telling the system that they're matched to that fund, because you still got to build the criteria for it, it won't let me exclude it. I can exclude the first one, but it won't let me exclude this one. So then when the applicant comes to the string, they're not going to see these fields because they've been hidden because I can exclude it, but they're going to see a bunch of do you meet the eligibilities. So how do I get rid of this question? Well, since this is an eligibility question, when we go to the fund criteria and start cleaning that up for our added funds and our old funds, then we can go ahead and do this one as well. So this one, let's say I'm at that stage, I don't want this. So I could at this stage go ahead and delete this, but I don't want to do it yet because I want to get the criteria cleaned up for it first. So how do we clean up the criteria? So now I've got my new fund. I added it to the questions. And then I have this one sitting out here that I need to clean up as well with that other process. So the easy process we'll talk about first. How do I build the criteria for that fund? Well, I'm going to go in here and I'm going to do manage fund criteria information. And I have that new fund. Add it here. I got to go into the right application form would be helpful. Go into this one here. And I do need to go here. Okay. Just wanted to make sure I did that in the right application form. Okay, so now we're going to go to manage funds criteria. So this is where we're going to do the cleanup. So let's talk about the new fund. So this is the new fund. This is the set criteria. Right now I haven't created the criteria, but I did add those questions. So there's the 2 questions that I need to build my criteria on. So now I can build that. So I want this to say contains or equals female. And then this question here is my second group. So the ethnic group contains Hispanic or Latin. This is group 2. Or, because I have, and then I can do a duplicate here. Let's trash that. And then this one, I can add here. Leave that. So I have 1. They have to be female. Contains Hispanic or Latin, or contains Mexican American. And then I can hit save and exit. And now I've got that criteria built for that one. That one's done. Now, that AJG fellowship, if I click on that one, remember I said that it had this contains yes? I can't get rid of that question. So in this scenario, I do have to come here and hit delete. And now, of course, with our new process, anytime you hit delete, it's also going to remove that fund in that criteria question, the criteria field in the question build. It's going to remove that there as well. So all I have to do is hit this, hit delete. Are you sure it's going to remove the conditions? I'm saying yes. And now it won't match them to the AJG fellowship. But the next step, of course, with that AJG fellowship is I need to go in to my application settings now that it's not matching, because what's going to happen, it's not matching. So I'm going to come here to my scholarships available, and I want to exclude these. I don't want to delete these because I need these questions later. And then I'm going to come here and I'm going to go exclude, yes. For some reason it's not doing what I need it to do. Let's exclude this one. Don't know why it's not excluding that. That one, and then this one. Come here, exclude, include. Are you sure? Yes. Okay. I have something going on with my site. Unfortunately, it's not reading something like it should. So, but normally you should be able to go in and exclude these without a problem because this is no longer a criteria question. So since it's not a criteria question, it would let you exclude that. But for some reason, my site's not doing that, and I apologize for that, but that's what it would do. I was doing it earlier today, but for some reason, I think because I took it out of there, there's something going on in the system that's causing me to not be able to remove it now. It's not reading it like it should. So anyway, now once you have those excluded, of course, next year if the AJG came back, I'd have to come here, click include so that it would be now part of it. I'm going to go ahead and make it include because I do want this to be a part of mine. And then just do the opposite with that question. The question's still there, it was just excluded. But what about the fund criteria? So if I didn't have the criteria built, so I have my AJG, so anytime you have a fund that has no criteria, it's going to match your applicants to that fund because it doesn't see any criteria, so it says, okay, everybody's eligible. So the other thing I would need to do with this one is come in and add a new condition of, and this is what you're going to do to anyone that doesn't meet eligibility or doesn't have funding. And I'm going to put if they have a status that equals withdrawn, then match them to this. Withdrawn means that the applicant's gone in and deleted the application form. They don't want to do it. So that what it does is once they've started it, it puts them as a withdrawn status. So it's only going to match applicants if they're at a withdrawn status, which is going to be very rare. And if they are, they wouldn't be getting money anyway because they haven't finished their application form. So, of course, that tells you then the answer to, okay, here's this DHG endowed scholarship. This one I'm not funding anymore this year, but I don't want to lose my criteria. So of course, here's my criteria I have built. I don't want to lose this. So what can I do? I want to keep it so that next year, if I want to bring it back, this criteria is here. All I have to do is add a new condition to this specific line. And the same thing, add a status that equals withdrawn. Make sure I have and this, and then I can hit save and exit, and now it won't match them to that specific scholarship for this year. Then of course next year when the DHG came along, all I have to do then is come back into here to the DHG, go back in, whoops, manage fund criteria, go back into view eligibility criteria, come here, hit this little trash can, hit save and exit, and then it would start matching once again. So that's how you would do that. So anyone that you don't want to use, if you're having the system use that fund eligibility, all you need to do here is come to that eligibility criteria and add that status of withdrawn, and it will not match your applicants. Okay, so that is how to build and remove criteria for your funds from each year to year and keep everything intact without having to remove anything. Now, what are some other areas that clone over that you want to look at? Of course, when you clone, your evaluation setup is going to be cloned over. So if I go to evaluations, so your committees, so all the committees that were there last year are going to clone over. So if you need to make adjustments, you can do that. The scoring or task cards that you've created, those are all going to clone over. So of course you want to look at the questions in those, make sure you don't have any dates or do you need to make adjustments, then you can make adjustments to those. And of course that your automated scoring, any automated scoring you have built for all of your funds, those are going to clone over as well. So all of that clones over. Your task cards, your committees, your automated scoring. Now something else you're going to want to look at is the notification center. And the reason you want to look at all of your email templates, which is in notification, is sometimes in your email templates, you've put dates. So like here, if I was to click on applicant decline award, you're going to see I have here, it says for the academic year. And so if you had a date here of 2023, then I would need to go in and make sure, because I don't want the applicant to get that in that email for this year, I would need to make sure that said 2024 if you're doing something like that. So that's something, if you're a new admin, always try to use merge fields when you have your templates. If you don't, and you do type in dates every year when you clone from year to year, you are going to have to make sure you go in and make adjustments to those email templates so that it doesn't have the old data. Because when you clone, you're cloning from what it said last year or last period. You want it to say the new period. So then, of course, you're making the change and then hit update, and then that'll make a change to your notification center as well. And then some other areas you want to look at are just your collaboration instructions, your request to applicants, your submittal message, proxy instructions. Those are also text fields. All of those are just text fields that you may have entered data that you might want to make an adjustment for the new period. Those are other areas you want to look at. And then the other thing that we wanted, the final one, is updating ad hoc reports. So your ad hoc reports also will clone. And so the ad hoc reports are going to be in Manage Reports. Here's your ad hoc reports. And you're going to see it keeps everything intact. So of course, if you removed a question or you took a question away, notice here, now that I'm in this new application here, I do have a Recreate Reporting Database. So don't click this button until you're done with building out all your funds, removing any questions, adding any questions, because what this is doing is it knows you've made changes. So before you go live, if you make a change on your fund or you make a change in your at questions, you want to make sure and click this button, because it will not match applicants in the managed fund criteria. This affects the managed fund criteria as well, because it considers that a report. It won't match applicants to those funds until you've recreated the reporting database. Once you click this button, it's also going to ask you to sync the applicant data and the reviewer data. So what it does is it looks at who initiated this, who is the admin, and once the system's done recreating it, it will send you an email. But I always recommend wait till you're completely done creating your application form, you're ready to test, then come here and recreate this so that you know that it's going to match your applicants accordingly. And then of course it will take a little bit of time to do that. And then you'll know it's been recreated because you're going to have a date here, reporting database last recreated on, and that's going to give you the date that it was recreated. So you do that after you've done making all your adjustments, because what it's doing is it's saying, okay, I can't run these reports because you've made changes to these questions that are in these reports. I can't build criteria. I can't match applicants to criteria because the reporting database, it's changed. You've added, you removed, you've made a bunch of changes to your fund criteria. I don't know how to do that. You do need to come here and click that button to make that happen. Then if you do this and you click all those other buttons and you realize you're still not matching, that's when you would want to enter a support ticket, asking our support team to intervene and see why it's not updating the reporting database. And that's ad hoc reports or any report in the system. You have to do that. Anytime you change criteria, anytime you add a fund, remove a fund, you want to make sure to come in here and hit this Recreate Reporting Database, which I just did, and then you'll see these two buttons. Once it's done doing the recreating, then you can sync applicant and sync reviewer data so that it gives you the most current data. Now, once you're done building your application, how can you test? If it's not a live application, of course, you can just go in as an applicant account and test. But if it is a live application, you can do one of two things. You can keep it unpublished like I have right now and go into the Manage Application Funds and send yourself the link, as it's an applicant account. When I say yourself, you have an applicant account, not your admin account. It has to be an applicant account. You want to test as an applicant. You can go into this fund here, and there is a link, Funding Opportunities link. You can copy this link, put it up here in your URL, and it'll take you directly to that specific application fund. It'll take you to that fund where you would be able to apply to it. Or you can, if I go out here, do the application invitation process where you have an applicant account built on the site. You go into this application, and then I actually have it turned on so that once I invite somebody, it automatically starts the application for them. That's in site settings, and that's under application invitation, how to use that functionality in Zendesk. There's more details on how that works. But you can go in and you can activate and you can invite yourself as an applicant, your applicant profile. I go home, go to that application form, go into notifications. I go to application invitation, and then I find my account. I'm just going to grab this one, and then I select it, and then I hit save. Are you sure? What it'll do is it's now invited this individual, and you'll notice since I had it in the site settings, administration site settings, to automatically start the application, it's now started, and I can see that application form. I can log in with my applicant account, go to my applications tab, and I will be able to see that application from the applicant's perspective and be able to test it that way. Now, one thing you do want to test is test your matching as well, because you do want to make sure that matching functionality is functioning correctly. But do a thorough test, and then don't go live until you test, because like I said, you don't want to delete or add once you've gone live. So if you've missed something and you've gone live, it's harder to correct it after you've gone live. If you haven't gone live, then it's easier to correct. So always test it thoroughly. That's the one thing that we can give as a takeaway, is once you're done setting it up, always make sure to thoroughly test it. So that's all I have for now, and I will go ahead and turn the mic over to Maureen to see if there's any final questions.
Yes, Christine. Just a few, not many, because we want everyone else to get back to the schedules. So one question is, can I add logos to my email signature? Right, under Manage Application Funds, Christine, can we go to the email signature, just pick any fund? So what happens is, as Christine has shown, the email templates, if you're going to use a merge field with flower brackets as signature, this information is going to populate from here, as Christine will open. And this is coming from the posting fund, not your assigned funds. With the one-to-many application process, you have to remember the email signature. If you are using the merge field flower bracket signature, whatever you post here will automatically come into your email template. Now, if you wish to, our attendee wants to know, can I add my company logo to it? Yes, absolutely. If you can see, there is a picture option. You can add pictures, right, very clearly. But now my suggestion, or our suggestion generally, is to avoid pictures, images, logos in your email signatures. The reason is, every organization or every email, the IT teams that are handling these email inboxes, they might want to block out anything that's harmful. Now, how these images are read at the recipient's end could be as spam or junk, and eventually end up in the spam or junk folders. So our advice would be not to add images or logos into your email templates or your email signature. Try to avoid this, because we don't want the communication to go missing somewhere. Thank you so much, Christine. Okay, another question is, on this very same screen, can I add donors, or should I be adding donors during the cloning process itself? Like, you have the assigned funds, and as we saw in the previous, before the Q&A break, we saw that there was a donor option. Right now, if you have donors, do you need to add donors right away during the cloning process? No, you can wait, because sometimes you don't have the details of your donors, right? Who is the absolute contact person from that specific fund? You can wait till you reach that stage in your application process and then add it. Be a little proactive and add it right before your application goes into the phase of thank you letters. So that is one question. And one last question. Let me just come back here. Okay, once I'm done testing my application, how do I go back and publish my application? Because at this point, as Christine has mentioned, by testing your application under invitation as the application invitation, one of the prerequisites is for your fund, your application to not be published. How will I make it available to my applicants? So there we go. Thank you so much, Christine. This is what you'll be doing, okay? Or on the previous screen, as Christine is showing, you just have to pick your posting fund. Thank you, Christine. Okay, just select the posting fund, click on publish. So once you're thoroughly done testing with the criteria, with everything else, then this is all you need to do. But before this, just make sure that your go live and deadline dates are in a place with the accurate deadline date, deadline time, go live date, all of it is in place. That's it, Christine. Thank you, everyone. Back to you, Christine. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Maureen, for all that. And I thank everyone for your patience with our technical difficulties today. We apologize for that. But of course, we do appreciate everyone taking time out of their busy schedules and going over this information. And so again, if you get the handout today, if you go into the handout section in that little blue drop-down area, there's that handout section. You can click on the name of the handout and then get a copy of it. And then what's nice is when you have that handout, it'll take you to the help guides on Zendesk. It'll have direct links to those areas. And so that you'll be able to click on those links and access those detailed instructions. So, because of course today we can't go into all the details on how to do certain things. So that'll give you more details on how to do some of the functionality we discussed today. So of course, if you do have any questions, again, if you have any questions, always feel free to enter a ticket in Zendesk. So go to your ticket area and go ahead and enter the information in Zendesk. Or of course, also if you see maybe you're interested in that $0 functionality where it doesn't match applicants, the applicants don't see the matching, and you want to know if that's something that's good for you, you can always ask for a client support specialist to meet with you, enter a support ticket and say, I'd like to have a meeting with the client support specialist and discuss the functionality with the funding sources being the amount allocated 0, it won't match applicants, something to that extent. And then one of them can meet with you and discuss that with you. So again, thank you everyone for your time, and we hope everyone has a wonderful week. And the next webinar we will be having will be on the 30th. And so that'll be the next step in your build out process. Now we'll be discussing, now you've went live with your application, how do you monitor your applicants as they're applying? Different things you can do in regards to managing applicants through that whole application process once they've started applying. And then after that, for the month of June, we'll start talking about the evaluation setup. We'll do one for the one-to-one and then one for the one-to-many for the month of June. How to set up the evaluation process, those task cards, those committee members. That's going to happen in the month of June. So hope everyone has a wonderful day, and we will see you again on the 30th. Thank you so much. Take care.